Lala, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this week is Baby Loss Awareness Week. Tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about some of the events that are going on in Dubai.
So I'm very privileged to be part of one of the founding members of Love Through Loss, which is our community out here in the UAE and wider region. Anyone can join who is walking the path of baby loss. It is a parent-to-parent support community, and it's hosted by various advocates and organizations and individuals all committed to supporting families through this process, raising awareness, offering education, and offering support crucially to families. So during this particular week and throughout the month, we host various events. Some are things that we do on a monthly basis and some that are targeted to this particular week. So we do a virtual event where we speak to different parents who share their stories with us, share their stories of their experience of loss, of their experience of caring for their grief, perhaps offering feedback on things that they didn't receive or they did receive that made a huge impact on their journey through loss. And that's really fantastic. It sits on our website as a resource that parents who are yet to even walk this path are able to then access and just know they're that little bit less alone, perhaps look at and see some of the logistical support that's out there, understand different mental health professionals who could support, and just connect in with other families. We do a beautiful, beautiful evening of remembrance up at the Nature Escapes in Al Barari. And that is just something that I set up with a couple of my colleagues about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And it's just the most special evening. And there's no RSVP needed. Families can come along. And it doesn't matter whether you lost your baby a week ago, a year ago. My mother-in-law comes along, and she lost my brother-in-law, over 40 years ago. And that's that space for her. And it doesn't matter whether your loss was in pregnancy, through birth, infancy, or whether this is unsuccessful infertility. And it's about creating a space. It's beautiful. We have a few little readings. We plant a tree, and it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous space. We then also do an evening of art and community, which is a lovely chance for people to come together, busy their hands, but be able to share if they want to, or just listen if they prefer. And we also have a virtual wave of light on the 15th, the idea being that everyone around the world is lighting a candle at 7 p.m. So together it creates this wave of light, this continuous wave of light.
One of the expressions that I came across that I was unfamiliar with when I was doing a little bit of research on doulas and what it is that you do was this term rainbow baby.
Yeah.
Which, correct me if I don't have it right, but it's that child who comes after parents have lost one child. And I can see how sometimes, as a parent myself, but fortunate, to have not lost a child, I can see how sometimes, there's the parent's desire to wrap themselves up in the rainbow child.
Yeah.
But are there missed moments where maybe the parents aren't doing enough grieving for the child that they did lose?
I think it's actually a term that's really often misunderstood, because for parents, I think there's two elements to that answer. One, that often if you have lost a baby, if we've walked that path of losing a baby, as a mum, that physical loss of that baby within, or of the baby that was in your arms, depending on the scenario, there is often a really strong desire to have that hole, that ache filled. And it's never, and even in that desire, that parent is so aware that that is not filling that desire, replacing that baby. That is just having that hole, that need for that love somewhere to go. But I think what's really important to understand is that there is no parent who has a rainbow baby. It's not a replacement of the baby that they lost. I think that all families, and it's certainly something that we are there to encourage and support, is holding space and for that little person that they lost, who's always part of their family, always. And a rainbow is only created when we've got both the rain and the sun. And those two things coexist. So I think that when you have a rainbow pregnancy, it brings up often its own anxieties. If you've been through baby loss before, then it impacts on your next experience because that anxiety walks beside you. You already know that the worst heartbreak can happen. And so it takes a lot of extra support often, and takes compassion and understanding from others who've walked that. And then you've also got that element of it brings a new layer to your grief, because often as that pregnancy continues, as that child grows, you are always reminded perhaps about the baby that you lost and what they didn't have, what you didn't get to experience with them, what those siblings might be like. And another thing is that often, because you conceive a baby after loss, sometimes that might be in a shorter time frame. And there's often that quite loaded idea that this baby wouldn't exist, this now living baby, if the other one had survived, because of the time considerations. So there are so many complexities to it. So I think it's something that people always need to remember, that this is not a fix. This is not the patch that makes people better. It's asking families, how do you want to hold space for the baby that you lost and the baby that you're carrying or that you're raising and parenting? How do we support you in that? I always say that parents they're the expert in themselves, and we just get to listen to them and follow their lead on what's right for them.
You know, when the child is lost so early, or through pregnancy, delivery, I would imagine that it would be difficult for, I'm a guy, and so I'll speak as a father. You know, for me, it's I would think it would be different if you've lost a child who's, say, 5 years old, than if you lost, you know, a child who was, you know, a few hours old, because the mother would have gone through so much that the father just can't relate to. And I assume, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the impact is obviously different. And it would be greater for a woman, yes? Like that sense of loss?
I think different is the word there. I don't ever want to have anybody ever have to caveat their experience against someone else's. And that goes for mums and dads together, because I think their experience of loss can be different. And that can be really hard to navigate on a relationship after loss. I think that, again, one of the things we talk about a lot in Love Through Loss is being able to hold space for everyone to bring their grief wherever they're at, so that we're never having to benchmark the person who lost a child in infancy to the person who lost a child at 7 weeks of pregnancy. Because the moment that you are pregnant, or the moment you even think about having a family, you've thought about what that might look like, how that might impact, what might be their estimated due time, what does that mean for like special dates like Christmas or whatever, you know, all of those sorts of things. Those hopes and dreams are planted from that very moment. So I don't ever want to say that it would be harder at this stage. It would be different, absolutely. But the person who got to hold their baby, you know, the people who didn't never got that experience. They didn't get to hold their baby. They didn't get to see them, see who this person might be, learn anything about them. So your grief is quite challenging because you don't have those tangibles to hold on to. So different, yes, but I don't ever, you know, it's one of the things I'm really mindful of is never ever to make anyone feel like they've got to benchmark or caveat their grief against anyone else's experience, or even against partners, because yes, you know, we do tend to see a difference in how people grieve, but I think dads are often really undervalued and underserved in that. And it's one of the things we've made sure to try and bring in at Love Through Loss. And we've got some amazing recordings of dads sharing their experience and sharing their stories. And it's a hard one because women are quite drawn to having conversation, meeting others, speaking to them, etc. And dads, that doesn't tend to be where they find comfort. Interestingly, one of the ways they do find comfort, there's an incredible podcast that won the UK podcast, I think last year, Dad's Still Standing. Absolutely fantastic resource. So dads can just sit in a car, listen to two guys who kind of get it, or walk through this, speaking about it, and get to kind of compartmentalize, perhaps, you know, having a let out for their grief. A lot of the focus for dads is always supporting mum. I think they go quite into the logistical mode. And there was an interesting study that came out of Ciao Lapo, an Italian organization that supports baby loss. And it showed that mums tend to have a real peak in the intensity and rawness of their grief at the time of the loss, whereas dads tended to kind of peak about a year later or sort of around the estimated due time.
Right.
And often it would cause a bit of perhaps potential conflict for if mums were feeling in a space where they felt potentially ready
Right.
to try and have another child and try and expand their family, and dads were perhaps leaning into that grief.
Again, I've been fortunate. My kids are fine. But just listening to you, it's emotional because I can't imagine there being a worse experience for a parent, right? And so when you're talking, I'm thinking about my kids, and I'm thinking, what if I were to have ever lost them? And I don't know. And I've seen celebrities talk about this.
Yeah.
And they say it's the most painful thing in the world for them. And they'll say something, and I don't necessarily think they intend it to be dramatic, but they'll say, that I don't smile. I'm not as happy as I once was. So I can't even imagine. But it is, it's a terrible situation. So for you here in Dubai, when you're trying to help work with these parents who are trying to, I guess, come to grief with it, and also maybe celebrate is the wrong word, but to at least acknowledge that this is something that happened, and to sort of, what is it that they can do so that they're in a better place as a result of it? And that, I guess, is incredibly important to you to work with these parents.
Yeah. You are going through a type of grief that is it is so much the reversal of the anticipation of us outliving our children outliving us. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. And even when we know the statistics, we know that, of people, of families, in the process or in the stage of life of building a family, 1 in 4 families experience a loss. Okay. And that might be, particularly around earlier pregnancy loss, etc. But even though we know the statistics, even though they're out there, we just don't think it's going to happen to us. It still has the ability to absolutely floor us. And that might be whether you've got living children or not. That might be whether you were, very early in pregnancy, or, whether it was in infancy. It is something that it's so momentous to walk through. And, that grief lives with you and stays with you, and it's finding ways to care for it. And, those sort of very loaded statements like moving on, getting over things, moving forward, etc. It is learning to build a life around that grief, and joy will come back into it. There will be smiles again, but you will always carry that. That will always be there.
So you've been here in Dubai 12 years?
Coming up 12 years.
Yeah,
goes by in a blink here.
Yes, it does. And were you like everybody else, decided to come out for 2 or 3 years?
No, we sort of came out without any definitive timeline. And I think I've been incredibly lucky in that what I do has come to me purely organically. I could not have scripted this. Never in a million years imagined that I would be in this field, in this line of work. And I love what I do. Absolutely love what I do. The families I get to walk beside and I get to meet, the amount of, the window into different birth cultures. It's just, and I don't think there's anywhere else that I could have such a privileged window into so many different birth cultures. I was doing a kind of count up over the summer, and I was reckoning that I've probably supported close to about 400 births and about 46 different nationalities on my last count up. And I just don't think I could live anywhere else that would have quite that beauty of diversity. And it's just incredible to see. It's really, really special. So,
okay, so here's a question. 46 different nationalities.
Yeah.
So if you were to look at all of those different cultures, what do you think are some of the traits when it comes to birthing that maybe the entire world could benefit from?
I think birthing is such an individual thing that I wouldn't want to say everyone should do this, but I tell you, when it comes to postpartum, I think that there are so many cultures that still really lean into this idea of like the first 40 days or the first, like that bit of postpartum being very sacred, and that mum should be nurtured and nourished and cared for and massaged and all those sorts of things. That is just something that, particularly within some of the Southeast Asian cultures, is done beautifully, and that I wish could be adopted universally, because I think that we put a lot of emphasis on birth. Birth often becomes this brick wall that we can't see beyond. And then parenting comes, and especially in Dubai, where we go, we can have anything delivered within 20 minutes. We are out there doing, and then a baby comes along. And it is, if we're fortunate to obviously bring home a living baby now, we're talking about, but it is the biggest handbrake that life can give you. These little people, if you're breastfeeding, tend to feed for sort of 8 to 12 out of 24 hours a day on very fragmented sleep. And it is a huge handbrake. You are having to sit with your own company in your own space and slow down and lean into this pace of life that is so different from our daily norm for the majority in Dubai. So I really, really, really emphasize, and I think that creating this nurturing time for mum, I know in some cultures, obviously the word confinement comes up, which sounds restrictive, but I want to, what I really, it's leaning into being, that rest, nest, nurture, and nourish phase of life, and surrounding mum with really good support. And that is something I think would be so valuable to setting up families with the best possible beginning, setting up mums with that strength and support from day one. We weren't meant to do this in isolation.
I've been here a while, you've been here a while, and it's not just here, right? There are so many societies around the world where the maternity leave is crap. Mm-hmm. If you were in charge of the world,
yep,
what do you think is and you have, I think most people, I don't want to generalize, but I'm going to say a lot of people want to also have, a full-time job. But I will ask you this question. If you were to, again, queen of the world, excuse
absolutely.
me, what do you think is the ideal length for a maternity leave?
Well, I mean, this is what's amazing, looking at how varied it is from different countries to different organizations. I think that this is where the choice needs to be given to parents. I really think that for many people, the absolute minimum should be 6 months of paid maternity leave. I think the paid parental leave for fathers, being able to mix that. But I think some countries that are doing it so well, where they've got up to 2 years, it's just fantastic. You're really protecting that early infancy, that time where little ones are, laying the foundations for life. And it's just so fantastic. There's so much we know about the neurodevelopment of children now, what normal sleep patterns are, and all of these sorts of things that our modern life and our, maternity care systems, our maternity policies and paternity policies just don't really lean into supporting. So while we've got the evidence, we don't follow through on actually making it possible. It's a challenging one.
Do you think that, and I don't want to, well, I do want to get into this, but I don't want to put you in an awkward position. Do you think it's because most leaders are men?
Oh, I mean, look, you rolled straight into the patriarchy back there.
100%, but I'm willing to, I think we should put women in charge. Like, what have men done? Maybe they've gotten us to this point, but you know what? There's an awful lot of war. There's an awful lot of tension. There's an awful lot of killing. There are lots of disagreements. I'm not saying necessarily women would get it right, but we've had our shot. Let's give women a chance for a while.
Look, I'm never going to say that I wouldn't like more women in leadership roles. 100%. Do I think that would make a difference? Yes. Because I think that it's such, it is so hard to comprehend how you feel about leaving your little one, returning to work, when that doesn't get to feel like your choice, when that feels like that's dictated for you by timeframes that are set up by an institution. That is something that is so, so hard for many, many people. And again, often very financially motivated. So being able to create more choice and support for families, more accessible childcare that feels appropriate for them, all of these things are hugely beneficial. We know that. We see that in societies who are enacting this. So 100%, I'm behind women in leadership roles, for sure.
Giving birth, I think, is seen as one of the most profound experiences certainly for women, I think for fathers, for the majority of individuals. But do you think society sees it too much as a medical procedure rather than something that is so much more than that?
I think there's definitely a tendency towards that, and definitely within more of the kind of higher income countries as well. So you look at the birth rates, for example, in places like US, UK, here. So I think one of the things that I would love to see is more options. I would like to see women having the option of having maternity, the midwifery-led care, rather than it being solely obstetric-led care as well. Because we know, you look at all the data, and it shows that it changes and improves outcomes in otherwise uncomplicated situations. I think respecting midwives for the role they have in being the professionals, the experts in supporting physiological normal birth. I'd love to see more birth centers. We've hopefully got Rise opening up down in Abu Dhabi, and that really spells a change for the region as well. So I'm forever hopeful that we will see more of this.
When I assume it's mostly women, but maybe, let's say when parents are thinking about working with a doula, what is it that you look out for or you listen for so that you can say to a prospective client, I'm maybe not the right person for you, or a doula is maybe not the right person? I would imagine that some people are coming in not sure what they want to do, and others maybe have a very clear idea of what they want. So what advice would you say that you could pass along that people should be asking themselves before they sort of make the decision one way or the other?
So I think it's what's important first to state is that a doula is someone who's there to support you. They are not directive. They are there to help make sure that you have informational access to really good resources. So they're there to share evidence-based information and anecdata where it's relevant. So
sorry to interrupt. I want to ask you, at what point do you come into the picture?
So typically, I get some clients that reach out to me really early on. Literally, I've just found out I'm pregnant. Could I have a conversation? And I also have those who I've taken on at, 41 plus 3, really just before giving birth. So there's a huge spectrum within there. I always have a complimentary introductory conversation with families because I want to make sure that I feel emotionally safe putting myself into that space with that family, that we click together. I want to make sure that they feel comfortable with that. But any doula, we're not directive, and we're not specific to, we support birth when it looks like this. We support clients who are having planned cesarean, who are having, an induction of labor, who are having hands-off physiological water birth, absolutely as natural as it comes. So it's not about us saying, well, we're not right for you. A doula is someone to walk beside you and give you that informational support, that emotional support, and bring physical comfort and emotional well-being through not just the pregnancy, the lead up to the birth and the birth itself, but into postpartum, into that huge transition into life as new parents.
Again, doing my research about the work that you do, I've seen that you don't judge, as you've indicated there. A doula's job is to support. But do you think that society has maybe too often misstepped, and there are certain biases that are attached to pregnant women?
Definitely, huge amounts. And I think being, the experience of being a woman, we tend to have guilt baked into it, and shame and things like that. And when you start to make birth have this hierarchy of like, well, I got to give birth like this, but I gave birth like that. It's it has a potential to be very damaging to someone's experience. I want people to have a really empowered birth, no matter how they give birth. I want to make sure that they feel like they were involved in the decisions around their care, that they were always made to feel the expert in their body, in their baby, in their choices. That doesn't mean you need to be the doctor, the doula, the midwife. It means that the woman's voice and the parent's voice together are centered in that decision making, so that no matter how birth unfolds, hopefully you come away feeling like, actually, I was really empowered in that, even if it didn't go exactly as I wanted it to. My role is to help understand, what the benefits and the drawbacks might be of door A, B, and C, and whichever door you choose to walk through it with you with compassion, with support, and love.
So your priority correct me if I'm wrong, is the mother and what she's going through,
Yeah.
right? Do you think that fathers to be would be that benefit from the father equivalent of a doula?
So I would say that doulas are there almost as much for dads as they are for mums.
Really?
And I would say that dads are usually the biggest convert if they've ever been a bit hesitant about sharing that space, because no matter how diligent and how dedicated and loving and compassionate that father is, birth is wild and it's powerful and it's unknown and unfamiliar, and having someone who sees it all the time in all its many forms and is able to walk beside and just help make sure that they feel confident that they've got things that they can do to bring support and comfort to the person that they love most in the world. Because that's the thing, they are having their own emotional experience of the birth of their child, of their partner laboring and birthing, whatever that might look like. We aren't. We see this all the time. So we are not centered in that experience. And so I think it makes a massive difference for dads. I think dads are often the person who absolutely go, you need to have a doula. Get a doula. It makes such a big difference. And for both of them, as you navigate the changes to your relationship afterwards and postpartum and working out how you can best support each other to get some protected pockets of rest, all of that, having a doula walk beside you, I think can make a really big difference.
So an ignorant question. At what point after the birth does your involvement end?
Well, sort of, if we're talking kind of, contractually or birth agreement, typically what I tend to do, so I don't take people on a birth only basis. I will always follow up with them, because for me, the debriefing of that experience, talking about their experience of it, is really, really important in integrating it for them and, being able to piece together bits of moments. And it's really important. So I always give women the opportunity to talk through bits that were positive, bits that they found that they struggled with, any times they felt unsupported or out of control or whatever they need to about their birth. And I'm there to support them. So I'm also a certified lactation counselor. I do a lot of breastfeeding support, helping nurture parents' confidence in routine baby care, helping them understand, normal infant sleep and behavior patterns, how to soothe the baby, tips for postpartum recovery for mum, ways that dads can help support that, all of those things. So typically that happens, usually I'll see them at least a couple of times at home in that first 6-week period. But I do a few other things where I get to say to clients, you can kind of have me walk beside you as much as you like for as long as you like. So I do a weekly support community for pregnant women and new mums in the community that I set up particularly for women like me and some of the clients that I walk beside whose experience to or through pregnancy and birth and parenthood might be a little different. It might be pregnancy after loss, the rainbow baby. It might be twins and multiples, like our journey, all right? It might be that high rates of anxiety, isolation, living somewhere where you haven't got a strong support system. So I cook a massive breakfast, or a brunch in the true sense of the word, and women can come to my house, and it's just a really beautiful private space where perhaps if you're not always feeling the bows and ribbons of the postpartum or the pregnancy world, there's a space for you. And then I do a little like a music and movement class that's just for my clients and for the kind of women in my community. Again, I have no term lease sign up. People can come when they want to, not when they don't. And then I've got a few kind of WhatsApp support communities and Facebook groups where, again, people can reach out years down the line. I have people say, can I just soundboard with you about like school choices or whatever it might be? And that's really touching. It's very special to get to walk beside families, having seen them from bump through to these little ones who are now, in school and thriving.
So you have 4 children.
I have 4, yeah.
Did you have a doula for the birth of yours?
Do you know what? I wish more than anything I could have a do-over all over again, because I will say that much as I love my husband and he's very supportive, he had no clue when it came to birth. And I had no clue to say.
Most of us don't, right?
To get, absolutely. So if I could do it again, I would have had a doula. I would have made sure I took more of an active role in my care rather than just said, you tell me, I'll do. And yeah, so I wish I could. I wish I could.
And do you think that personal journey has helped
100%.
you in your current role?
Absolutely. Because while I did things like hypnobirthing with my children, which I found absolutely wonderful, and I love teaching now, I think the experience of going through something that can feel so deeply isolating. I think there was a lot out there. I felt that if you were having sort of the more mainstream experience, okay, then we've got you covered. This is what prenatal classes look like. This is what this looks like. And even in all the training that I've done since for childbirth education, hypnobirthing, doula, when it starts to fall outside of the spectrum of normal, we're not in there. And especially with twins and multiples, it's like, this is everyone else, but this isn't you. You'll be separate to this. And that's where I wrote my own antenatal course and books on supporting and preparing for life with twins and multiples, mighty multiples, which I love teaching. I love working with my twin and triplet families. And I was very privileged to be asked to contribute to a book with Cambridge University Press about the emotional concerns and aspects of pregnancy and early parenthood with multiples. And I'm thrilled that it's starting to be brought into the context of books for medical professionals to take into account the emotional consequences and, the importance of introducing them to peer support communities like Twins Plus Arabia, so that you can speak to other families of twins, because no one gets it quite like another twin parent. You kind of clock them and you're like, oh, you know this, you get this. And I'd had 2 children quite close together. So I kind of thought, and I'd had a boy and a girl. I thought, whatever comes next, I've got this. And then the universe went, oh, watch this. And I became spontaneously pregnant with identical twins who shared a placenta, so monochorionic twins. And in that case, about 10 to 15% can contract something called twin transfusion syndrome, where they unfortunately don't share the blood flow evenly. And it's a awful condition that without treatment can be fatal in up to 90% of cases. And we had to have laser surgery at 17 weeks pregnant in utero to try and basically cauterize the blood vessels to leave enough of an even blood flow for both babies. It's, again, a surgery that's not without risks. There's about a 60% chance that one baby will survive, but about a 30% chance that both will survive. So it was a really, really frightening time. We hadn't been in Dubai more than 6 months. The surgery wasn't available here at the time. We had to travel to go and have this. Thankfully now it is down at the Corniche with the amazing Leanne Bricker down in Abu Dhabi. But it was so hard. And it was, trying to find someone else who was pregnant with their second, let alone their third and fourth, let alone someone who was going through a pregnancy where you kept being told, listen, the babies may not come home. It was just so loaded. And I think I felt so that none of that support that was out there related to me in my situation. And it was my fetal medicine consultant from the Corniche who said to me, you need to go and become a doula for these women, the women like you. And of course, then I went down the rabbit hole of, having newborn twins, which means you do nothing other than that for the first 6 months. But then when I started to come out of that, it just started to happen organically. I would go, if a twin family, for example, I started hosting coffee mornings, support mornings. If a parent had one baby come home from NICU, but one still in, and you couldn't take the baby who'd been discharged back into NICU, I'd offer to go and sit with that baby, and they would go into NICU, and I'd hold the other one and be there to support them with that. And it just grew in this really big, beautiful snowball to become all the things that I get to do today for smaller mighty babies, babies born poorly in preterm, Twins Plus Arabia, love through loss, all the different elements of things that I've walked as a parent myself. But more so, that inspiration is not uniquely my own. It's of the journeys I've walked with the women and the families that I've been beside.
So as somebody, we're both in the same position where we've traveled. Our kids have been born overseas. So you had 2 and then you had twins.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you have 2, this is what I've always said to people when they've asked, oh, it must be tough with twins. I said, actually, it's not if you're both into it. Because what happens is, you have, if you're traveling, you have a bag, you have a baby. Yeah. And the other person has a bag and a baby. Yeah. The tricky part is when you have a third, or in your case, 2. So the traveling must have been a massive change.
I'll have to send you a photo. I was like a push me, pull you, like the good old Dr. Doolittle. So I would wear a twin on my front, a twin on my back, and then I would have slung over each of my shoulders. I'd have whatever like bag I had with all the kit in. I think I traveled with nothing other than, my passport. Everything else was changes of clothes for everyone, everything that you needed, breast pumps, you name it. And then I would have my other two hands would be for my two little children, because I was often traveling without my partner as well. So it was a lot. And with twins, you can't travel by yourself until they're over 2. And I think, I hear a lot, well, listen, it's harder having two babies of different ages. I dispute that. I had that, and that is challenging, 100%. But having 2 little humans who can't yet support their own head, unless you have a child which has special needs, which is its own unique entity, then you always had the ability for at least one of them to sit up, if not walk, before the other one came along. With twins, you don't.
Yeah, but then people would say, yeah, but that one could take off. Well, I'm still trying to address this one.
Potentially, I suppose you still have that. But if I've got one baby, I can also take off. If I've got 2 babies, the logistics of getting up and carrying them.
Fair enough.
So I had all of those things that came that way.
Yes, you did.
And this is why I kind of talk a lot about it. And again, when I'm working with, clients who are having twins as their 3rd and 4th and 5th, 2nd and 3rd, it's trying to talk about what's that going to look like for a sibling? How do we make sure that everyone's supported as much as possible in this?
So after the birth of the twins, you then had 4. Did you and your husband make a decision? Halas, that's it?
Oh, I would have another baby tomorrow if my
Really?
husband was aboard. Absolutely.
You are a rock star.
I would know. I think probably just a little bonkers.
Yes,
love it.
not a little, definitely a lot.
100%. I love it. And also, but I am very aware, and I can recognize that slightly selfishly, I want to do it now, knowing all the things I know now.
Right.
I will always feel a little bit sad about not getting to have the experience that I would like to have and have the support now that I know to be so valuable. But there's a huge pleasure in getting to help provide that space for other families.
Okay, last question. Queen of the world again.
Okay.
Maternity care in Dubai in 25 years.
Okay.
Do you see it being more of a natural process, maybe like it might have been, many generations ago? Or do you see it becoming more of a medical procedure as it is often?
I am always glass half full, and I think what I would say is we are incredibly lucky to have access to exceptional medical care when it's needed, and intervention. We know that those are being used at a rate that is undeniably higher than is otherwise needed when we look at kind of recommendations from the WHO, etc. However, I would really hope that in 25 years' time, what we see is more options. We see birth centers, we see midwifery-led care, we see the option of having home birth supported, people being able to be in their safe space. Look at how different birth is from our grandmother's generation, what their expectations were in terms of everything from the pain relief that was available, the medical support that was available, the technology that was used to support birth, which has both its brilliant pros and undeniably its cons that can lead to higher rates of intervention, just completely different. And the way that they were supported, having that continuous care of, known people around them as well, makes a really big difference. So I think the thing that I would really like to see in 25 years' time is more choice for women so that people can decide what feels right for them.